I enjoyed this a lot. Okay, well with that, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to Protect Your Vote. I'm Stephen Nelson. I'm president of the Voting Rights and Election Law Society at Wayne State. We're here tonight to discuss potential election changes in Michigan. Specifically, there's a package of, sorry, try to slide things around on my computer. Okay. We're specifically here to talk about a package of 39 bills in the state legislature. So if these are enacted into law, how would these bills affect your ability to participate and vote in future elections? What would that mean for the state of democracy in Michigan? Which is all to say, why do we think you need to protect your vote at this point in time? And why do we think that these bills represent a new attempt at voter suppression? So a little history is important with this, and why to be suspect. Under the United States Constitution, citizens do not receive the right to vote. At its ratification, many people were barred from voting entirely. It's not surprising to us now, but over time, we have limited what may be used as a condition for voting. For instance, the right to vote shall not be denied or abridged on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, according to the 15th Amendment, or on account of sex, according to the 19th Amendment. And we've made other changes to the Constitution in time. But preventing these and other blocks of voters from being able to vote do not end with constitutional amendments. Instead, these efforts morph into other forms. Poll taxes became widely used in the decades after the 15th Amendment, until another amendment prohibited their use federally. And that was one of several methods of suppressing votes. Some jurisdictions simply did not allow Black individuals to register to vote. Literacy tests were administered that gave significant discretion to those administering them, discretion that was used exactly as intended to discriminate who could vote on account of race. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was intended to address these shifting tactics because lawsuits could not keep up. Once a change would be made, once a change would be challenged, they'd have moved on to another one. For example, the Voting Rights Act required federal pre-clearance of any changes to voting procedures before implementation by those jurisdictions that had previously been found to discriminate on account of race. However, the Supreme Court in 2012 significantly undermined the Act's power in Shelby County v. Holder, and previously blocked changes started happening at a rapid pace again. So with this history, it's important to always ask about proposed changes to election laws, particularly when they're this expansive. When they're 39 bills, that's a lot of changes being made all at once. And it's important to consider that people who attempt to suppress the vote do not advertise that that is what they are doing. They do not say that voter suppression is the real reason for the changes. Instead, they claim alternate justifications that may sound plausible, but often have the same consequences of limiting certain populations from voting. So for instance, what effect does limiting ballot drop boxes have on whose votes are counted, as is the case in Senate Bill 286? What discretion do election officials have in signature verification, as in SB 308? These are the kinds of things that we want to consider, and I think this panel is remarkably situated to do so. So we are very fortunate tonight to have three esteemed panelists here to speak with us about the current legislative efforts to change elections in Michigan. We invited these panelists to get a multitude of perspectives on what is important in the current wave of voting legislation in Michigan. Stephanie Chang represents the 1st District in the Michigan State Senate, which includes Wayne State University, and she is on the line and will be in camera mode shortly. And then Gabriela Santiago Romero is a lifelong organizer and is currently the Policy and Research Director at We the People Michigan, and also a candidate for the Detroit City Council in District 6. And finally, Jamie Lyons Eddy is the Director of Campaigns and Programs for Voters with Voters Not Politicians in Michigan. So tonight, what we want to discuss for the next 40 minutes, I'm going to pose questions to the panelists and ask their perspectives on these questions. Following this, we'll open to audience questions for the final 15 minutes or so. Please submit your questions in the chat box here on Zoom, as Calder mentioned before we started recording. And a member of our team will be monitoring that to select questions to ask at the end. And then at the end of the event, a few members of us from the Voting Rights and Election Law Society will stay on in the Zoom in case you have any additional questions that we don't get to with our panelists once they leave. So once again, I want to say thank you to all of the panelists. And I will start off by just saying, what do you think is most important in these bills? Like, what jumps out at you? Why is this a thing that we need to talk about right now? So I will put it to Jamie Lyons-Eddy to start, because she was just saying this is the cause of the moment. So I'll let you go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and hello to everybody who's here tonight. There's so much in this package, as you mentioned. There's the things that everybody's talking about, which is, restrictive ID policies for both in-person and absentee voting. It prohibits postage on absentee ballot applications. It prohibits the Secretary of State from sending out applications or even linking to them on the website. There's so much. And then, the recent House substitution, which I don't know if we'll get into now, actually would make us the worst state in the country in terms of requiring both photo ID and signature matching at a polling place. But some other bills here that don't get as much attention, I think would just cause chaos in polling places. These bills strengthen the rights of challengers against, instead of poll workers, require only partisan challengers, increase the number of challengers. So there's another element here of perhaps intentionally trying to create chaos in polling places.
Gonna have to get better at muting and unmuting myself. Gabriella, you were nodding along, so I'll throw it to you next.
Yeah, no, thank you, Stephen, and thank you for having me too. I'm really excited to dive into this conversation. For me, what stood out, what made me just boil, was just the fact of how people can be criminalized with some of these bills, the changes that it's made, how if you, and how confusing it is too. When I read, there's this one, which bill is it? SB 302, requiring you to make sure that you're not registered to vote in any other state. That is incredibly unfair. I have an ex who used to live here. She lives in California. I still get her ballot here, but she's not voting here, right? So I think it's incredibly scary. It's not fair the way that it's written. I think it's purposely strain people from even voting in the first place, because you would ask yourself, like, I just moved, maybe I don't want to vote, what's the point? And also there are just other bills that are changing laws that criminalize voters for not knowing whether for tapering with their early ballots, and people make mistakes. So really what I see is that you are honing on people's like humanity and the mistakes that we make. These are people who might not be educated, might be elders, might be new immigrants, new citizens, and it's just criminalizing folks for making like mistakes that people make already, but that we know do not cause any any issues with our voting. Our voting is secure. It is good. It is legal. So this is just, I think, just curveballs throwing out at residents that are incredibly scary and unfair.
Senator Chang?
Sure. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I guess just first a general statement, and then I'll talk about a couple of bills that I think are some of the most egregious. I've been the other side on this issue has a very easy, short message, which I'm not going to repeat because you never repeat the other side's message. So what I've been trying to push out, and we've got fair for in the background, sorry for the toddler noises, but what I've been trying to push out is that these bills make it harder to vote and are based on a lie. And so I've been, sometimes we get so into the weeds that we don't have a clear message. And I think it's really important that we have a clear message. And so many of these bills make it harder to vote and are based on a lie. They're based on this premise that somehow our election was stolen and that there are massive problems with our elections, and that's just not the case. And so I just wanted to start with that, and I think it's really important that we are clear and concise with our message. In terms of, one of a couple of bills that really stand out, it's a pair of bills that I just think are so harmful. Senate Bill 303 and 304, we call them the strict voter ID bills. And, one bill gets rid of the affidavit option. So if you show up at the polls and you don't have an ID or you forgot your ID, right now you're able to sign an affidavit. And this takes that away. And then the other bill, 304, which goes with it, makes it so that so if you don't have your ID, instead of being able to sign an affidavit and vote, you would get a provisional ballot. Well, now that provisional ballot wouldn't get counted until days after the election. And under 304, you would have to actually go or somehow prove not just your voter record, prove that you are who you are. You also would need to bring a current utility bill, bank statement, government check, or other government document. So it's actually making it even more strict and even more egregious, just in terms of this type of a barrier. And so I know that there was a lot of attention on the absentee voter photo ID bill, but I think that these pair of bills are extremely backward and could do considerable damage, to our residents being able to access the vote. And so I'm very concerned about them. We voted on them recently in the Senate, and then they went over to the House. The House made them even worse. And they're back. We didn't actually vote on them today and in the Senate. So we'll see what happens in July. But I'm very, very concerned.
So I'd like to go back to kind of what you were just, like you brought up 2 points that I think are worth fleshing out a little bit more. One is that this is, based on a falsehood or a lie, however you want to describe it. I would go with the latter personally. I mean, the House Republicans are running this in a way that is, or they're bringing this out in response to the last election because there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of things have been said about fraudulent ballots, but there hasn't been any evidence of that. And even Republicans themselves just had, to my knowledge, just released their own report a few days ago that said that there was nothing. So how do you focus on that as, to me, that's revealing in that this is a non-existent problem. And that's why it kind of like, it's difficult to look at this as a good faith effort to strengthen election ballots, or elections in Michigan. How do you connect those dots in terms of, messaging? Like you said, being on message is important, but also just kind of, I'll start with that. So I can go right back to Senator Chang and we can go back around.
Sure. Well, I think that, you're right. So there, actually, it's fascinating because there was just an article in, I can't remember which publication it was, about Ed McBroom, UP senator who chairs the Senate Oversight Committee, which held a number of hearings, long hearings that were filled with people just saying a lot of things about what they thought happened, and then also other people who were providing some truth, which was really important. And I remember actually getting a couple of my friends who worked at TCF on election day to actually, they were able to testify by Zoom, because I think it was really important that people shared their testimony about what really happened. And so I was talking with one of my colleagues, Jeff Irwin, who sits on that committee. And I really think that they were doing these hearings because they were trying to find fraud. Like, they were actually trying to find out if there was fraud. And, he concluded after these many hours of testimony, after trying to find fraud, that there wasn't any. And so I think it actually is really, in a way, kind of powerful to have Senator McBroom, who was looking to find fraud and decided, you know what, there just really wasn't. That's pretty powerful, actually. And so I also recognize that he is in this terrible position now of former President Trump, you know, targeting him and others for saying the truth. And so I think we have to recognize when we have unlikely allies in speaking the truth. I mean, what's not good though is, of course, you know, in addition to saying that there wasn't fraud, they are also still pushing these bills. So it's sort of like doesn't mesh, that, you know, doesn't mesh. But at the same time, they are willing to actually make those public statements. So just in terms of like, how do we go forward, I think that we have to just continue to tell the truth. We have to continue to tell people what really happened and what really didn't. We need to really make sure that we're lifting up our local election officials who, you know, many of them have actually been getting lots of attacks and threats and all of these things, and is just completely inappropriate. And I think we have to recognize that, you know, if anything, Michiganders want greater access to the ballot, not restrictions, and certainly not voter suppression. And so we need to be really clear about that, and we need to be unafraid to tell people the truth, even in areas of the state where that may be a tough message, but it's one that people need to hear, and they need to hear it from trusted sources.
I'll go to Ms. Santiago Romero.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephanie. I wholeheartedly agree. And to your question, Stephen, of why, if we know what is right, I would just say this is a partisan game. These bills are bills that are being introduced across the state in various variations, but they are doing the same thing. They're suppressing people's right to vote because they see how incredibly powerful it is. So to Senator Chang's points, we are powerful. The things that we do matter. And I was one of those folks that was at TCF. I got the call about 11:30 when we found out that there was 100+ Republicans that stormed, that were essentially hovering over primarily elders, African-American Detroiters, elder women who are counting ballots, rightfully so, who are doing their job well, who are being bombarded by people who were challenging them just to simply stop them from doing their jobs. So when I got there, quickly we got a training through ACLU, so we knew what was going on. We knew lawfully what we were able to do or not do. And really, I spent my whole time really just fighting challengers who were hovering over people who are voting during a pandemic. Because remember, we are still in the height of a pandemic. We were double masked, triple masked. This was like the COVID was really, really bad. And we have elders who are counting ballots with primarily Republican folks, young Republicans who are hovering over them, breathing on them, yelling on them, questioning them, and it's really just creating threats, really creating fear for folks. But we showed up and we were there. I literally had to put my body in between a voter, someone that was counting, and like another challenger, because they were just hovering, and that's not okay. So it terrifies me to know that they are trying to have equal parts of both parties for every single count, because I know what that means. It doesn't matter if it's equal. It doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, we do different tactics, and I see their tactics. Their tactics are not okay. So this is a partisan game. This is happening across the country. It's really a backlash, because we did what we did. We voted in large numbers, but as we saw, we're pretty split. We are very split in this country. It was a very close race, I think, too close. So I'm very fearful of these bills. And to Senator Chang's point, we have to call. We have to share our stories, because they ultimately see that we are right, and hopefully they can continue to work towards the truth. But again, they're playing a partisan game by still pushing these bills, because collectively that is what one side is doing. So for us, we have to, I believe, you know, as Senator Chang mentioned, keep sharing our stories, keep showing up, keep telling the truth.
Ms. Lyons-Eddy.
So, I mean, these panelists were very eloquent about this, but the only thing I would add is that, I mean, there is a nationally funded and nationally coordinated effort to get fewer people to vote. And we think that it's another case similar to gerrymandering, where politicians are trying to pick their voters instead of voters picking their politicians. And I mean, I think that's really the motivation behind this, is to make sure that certain people have a harder time voting.
Well, I'll stick with you, and I'll go to the next question, because I think I should have gone with this earlier probably, but like, what is the mechanism by which this makes it harder to vote? Everyone's agreed that these bills are going to make it harder to vote. So if you could spell out like what that is, why exactly you see these bills doing that kind of in practice, because I think it is very easy to see superficially, this seems like, you know, a benign election rule that's not going to affect anyone. But when you add it up, you get a lot of you know, delays or whatnot. So yeah, if you could just speak to that. Why does this make it harder to vote, and why is that beneficial in a partisan fashion?
So, I mean, there's many ways, you know, as you know, there's this huge package of bills, but if you happen to be a person who doesn't have ID, or you forget your ID when you go to the polling place, this will make it much harder to vote. We have a perfectly good voter ID law in Michigan that's worked fine for a long time, and it's very effective. Also, you know, something that's really come to my attention is the older Michiganders, lots of people no longer have a driver's license, and then they are more likely to vote absentee, and they would have no mechanism to apply for an absentee ballot under these new rules. Also, if you're used to voting with a drop box, there are laws in this package that would allow like county canvassers to remove drop boxes or restrict their use. If your line is really long at your polling place, but drop boxes now can't be used after 5 p.m. on election day. There's so many cases. If your signature has changed since you signed whatever you signed to register to vote, that's the current substitute version of Senate Bill 303. Or if you get challenged at your polling place by, you know, that's encouraged. These bills would encourage a more partisan, chaotic environment at the polling place, so people can get challenged who were never challenged before. So those are just a few of the ways that it would be harder to vote for students, for seniors, for people in underrepresented communities.
I'll just popcorn back to Santiago Romero.
Yeah, no, I think Jamie covered it. The one for me, definitely the ballots, the drop boxes being removed. I got really angry because last year county commissioners voted to expand the budget for that, and they put a bunch of boxes out. So I was like, great, but now they're going to remove them. I think I lost the one other one that I was going to mention. Oh, no, I would just like to emphasize how incredibly scary it would be for people of color and for immigrants who are new citizens to be voting on in person, because already last year, especially in Southwest Detroit and other places of the city, there were opposition folks that were, and we've heard it before. And the thing is, what makes it worse is that whether or not this was true or not, there's fear that happened a lot in the last election. So we got calls saying that there's people here with guns, like just hanging out like at the corner of the polling location. When people hear that, they don't want to show up. But and if the law passes that says it's 50-50, that's incredibly scary for folks that come from a very democratic city, who feel comfortable voting in their city, who now have to deal with potential tensions at the voting line. So 100%, when I read those, I could just picture the chaos and the fear and the confusion that we already have. Like, these are things that I already deal with every single election, because we don't have proper language or properly trained already, like folks at the voting location to support really our people who are most in need. So 100%, these bills make it incredibly difficult prior to voting, to even getting the ballots, to the day of, and it challenges you as Senator Chang mentioned, your ballot might be taken away and not counted until days after the election. So overall, very, very bad.
I think I saw Senator Chang rejoined. She's not in the. She got.
Yeah, I mean, I
Okay,
sent
sorry.
you a message.
Yeah.
I didn't know what the question was. So
Oh, that's okay. So I was just asking of the, how do you see these impacting voters and your work? Like, what is the mechanism by which these make it harder to vote? Because I think everyone agreed before that these in aggregate and many of them individually will make it harder to vote. So like, what is that process by which it's doing that?
yeah, well, I mean, I think that Gabby and Jamie sort of covered a lot, and I think we kind of covered this a little bit in the last question, but I think, you know, recognizing that a lot of people don't have ID, and that and specifically talking about seniors, as Jamie did, is I think really important, and that's why we saw groups like the AARP come out in opposition to these bills. Okay, so everyone who voted for these bills disagrees now apparently with the AARP. That is just fascinating. Anyway, but you know, in addition, I think that one of the things that I think is really, on top of all of the things that are wrong about the actual content of the bills and how I also think that this is just generally, I think that people feel attacked, right? Like, and I think that that's important to highlight here, because in addition to the actual policy changes, the fact that, I mean, this is basically saying we don't value certain people's voices. So if you're a senior, or if you're homeless, or if you're a person of color who, you know, just all of these factors, if you don't have a car and you aren't able to get to where you need to go, you're basically saying, we don't value your voice in our democracy. And I think that's really harmful. So in addition to all of the actual, you know, harmful policies, I think the impact is also, what if people are confused when the next election comes and are not sure what is law or what wasn't law, or what happens with those bills that we heard about on TV, and, you know, is my vote going to count, or what's the deal with the drop boxes? And I think that groups that like Gabby's group and so many others that do really important work to get voters informed, and voters not opposed, all of the groups that do this work to make sure that people are informed about what their rights are going to have a lot of work to do, even more so than in previous elections, because it's going to be very confusing for people. And so I'm worried about that, on top of all of the actual damage that the bills themselves will do. I think there's like a multi-layered impact that we're going to see.
So one question I have, as we were looking through these and kind of weighing a lot of these bills, is that a lot of them do seem to have this effect of making it harder. Are there any of the bills that any of you see as maybe less problematic, or there's merit in them on their own? Or is this, you know, like, is this something that people, when they're looking at this, should kind of challenge the whole package? Or is there more focus that people should apply to certain bills when they're calling their legislators or whatnot? We'll go with
no, they're all bad. The answer to that is they're all bad. Even the ones that maybe look okay on the surface, like having early voting the second Saturday before the election. And there's one, I think, where 16-year-olds can pre-register, but those are both restrictive in their own way. And for example, when 16-year-olds can register, would only be at the Secretary of State's office, and that would close out or close off the other avenues for people who are not yet at voting age to pre-register. So I think they're sneakily bad, and it's sort of a wolf in sheep's clothing, and you really need to look at the whole package together. And our Voters Not Politicians position is that the whole package is damaging.
Yeah. So I'm just going to chime in here and completely agree. As we mentioned, Michigan we have a safe and secure voting process. Why are we challenging this? This is just This is just challenging that. So to me, I completely agree. These are bad bills. There are some that look good, but there just aren't. And it was mentioned, Dominica, thank you so much for your brief on the bills. It was mentioned the Secretary of State introduced her own advance the votes bills. So we have a Secretary of State that is doing her job, that is making sure that we're able to vote. So I would agree that these bills are all bad. They're not useful. They are confusing to folks who are reading them, who might think, oh, this is okay though. No, it's not. And I would just like to remind people again, these bills did not come just from our state, from a few people. These are national bills that are being pushed from one partisan group for a reason.
Senator Chang, anything to add?
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add. I mean, I agree with statements that have been made. I think that we have to just remember where these came from, and like Gabby said, and think of them as a group. And yes, there are some that are seemingly okay, but once you take a closer look or combine them with another bill, you know, it's not what it seems to be. And so I think that's important to make sure that people know.
So I'll stick with you for a minute. And one of the things that we wanted to get through with this event is just kind of a like helping people understand the process of the bills in the legislature, and kind of, you know, following that or following along with the bill's progress or the package's progress, and where are the spots that they can be most influential, or like where should they focus their efforts. You know, so I think one thing that often gets mentioned is, you know, call your state legislators and ask, or, you know, and tell them what you think about this. So I'll start with Senator Chang again, of like, you are a current legislator. How does that work for people? Like, what can they expect when they call in, and what kind of information should they convey? Is it you know, useful to find some prompt and just kind of read off of it, or is it better if they just, you know, kind of have their own thoughts directly that summarizes that, or what have you? You know, what is the best way to influence these as they go through the legislature?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, I think a couple things. I always encourage people to call or email. I think that it's really important for us to hear from people in our districts. I do think that it's also helpful for us to know, even if you know that, you know, for example, me or many of my colleagues on the Democratic side, even if you know where we are already, it's still good to hear from you. And so, you know, definitely feel free to reach out and let us know, you know, your position on things. So, but I think and I think this is really important for people in districts that are more mixed, or in conservative districts, really important for people to make sure that the legislator knows, you know, what your viewpoint is. As far as you know, how to go about it, I think, you know, it's really just whatever you're comfortable with. I know some people, if they haven't done that type of outreach before, having a little script is helpful. And so I think that is great. You can totally use that. I know lots of groups have been using that and calling our offices. So that's totally fine. And then emails also fine. You know, we track all of these things. And so, you know, feel free to do what works for you. I think, you know, we do get a lot of sort of copy paste messages, and that's fine. But I do think that it's helpful if you have your own personal story of someone who, you know, may be impacted negatively by the bills, or you have, you know, some extra information you want to share or something like that, that's a little bit more personalized. That's always really helpful. So that way we can know sort of where you're coming from specifically. And then also sometimes it's actually really helpful to have some of the personalized stories, if you're willing to share, because sometimes we will, if, you know, with permission, share those with colleagues, or, you know, mention them in a speech on the Senate floor or different things like that. So those, I think that the personal testimonies are always really, really helpful.
Thanks. Did either of the other two have anything to add to that, or is like what do your organizations or what is your recommendation tend to be to people about advocacy related to potential legislation?
Well, I was really glad to hear Senator Chang say that they want to hear from constituents, even if those constituents kind of think they have you pegged about how you're going to vote on something. So we make that argument. We have a program at Voters Not Politicians called Dial for Democracy, and we have about 2,000 people who are ready to call their senators and representatives whenever we let them know. Part of what we help them do is figure out when these votes are going to happen, because it's not always as announced as we'd like it to be. So we let them know, we give them links and some information about the bills. We give them a suggested script, but we do suggest that they, say things in their own words, and we give them the numbers for the representatives and let them go. And so that's a way, you can join a group that helps facilitate that. But I think a message that's really important for this particular issue is, don't vote for anything that makes it harder for me to vote or harder for my mom to vote or my neighbor, and again, those personal stories I think are really important.
Yeah, I would just add, coming from a community organizer standpoint, absolutely everything that was mentioned. I can personally tell you, I interned with Senator Chang when she was in the House, and I think many of us think that the government doesn't care. They don't look at the calls, they don't check the emails. I will tell you, in her office, we do. And even if it's a copy and paste letter that we get that's like from a petition, we count that. She literally would say, count how many we get in, because that matters. So absolutely make those phone calls, send those emails, sign the petitions, because those of us who are voting in good people are doing good work. Those folks are doing good work. So I know it's true. I want us to like demystify that process of you thinking if you send something and it just goes into a black box. It doesn't. People read it, people collect it. I would push a little bit more as a community organizer to create a petition for your community, for your city, for your district, and say, hey, like get 100, 500, 1,000 people to sign. As mentioned, even if it's a copy and paste, the numbers matter, the stories matter. Put in your own comment, put in your name. If you want to be on social media, tag them on Twitter, have a Twitter storm, call all your friends to one day at 12 o'clock, ruin their lunch and say, you can't eat lunch until you make sure that we don't pass these bills. You can be creative. And I think many times we don't think about that, but these are folks who work for us, and we should be able to organize ourselves in whatever way that we think is best in doing so. So I say be creative. I say do reach out, because it does matter. And I do just want to emphasize on what Senator Chang mentioned is, if you have friends that are in places that are more conservative in the state, reach out to them, have them call the representative, because it really does matter that both sides hear what we want and that they hear the stories. So those are my 2 cents.
One follow-up I have with this is, we have a governor that's not expected to sign any of these bills, but the impression that I've gotten, and I think it bears out, is that there is the potential for this to be enacted despite that, and not necessarily by being overridden. And I think this is something that maybe we'll start with Ms. Lyons-Eddy, because this is a statewide petition angle, and that's something your group has a lot of experience with. So yeah, if you could tell what's the alternate pathway that people might not be familiar with.
So Michigan is one of the about half the states in the country have an initiative and referendum process where you can have citizen initiated both legislation and constitutional amendments. And Michigan also has a really kind of strange feature where if you collect, right now it's about 340,000 valid signatures, the legislature can take up that legislation, take up the law and enact it. And it doesn't ever go to the ballot, and it doesn't go to the governor for a signature. So it bypasses both the governor's veto and all of us as voters. And actually, some of the people involved in this movement have publicly said that's what they intend to do here. So that's actually VNP, Voters Not Politicians, is very busy preparing for that eventuality. It's also possible for them to do a constitutional amendment proposal that takes more signatures, about 425,000. And if they did that, they could put that on the statewide ballot for 2022 and actually reverse a lot of the gains that we made with Proposal 3, which hopefully many of you remember, Proposal 3 in 2018 that really brought Michigan up to, you know, one of the better states. It was really not very good in terms of voting policy. And so with a constitutional amendment, they could actually reverse that progress.
So if I understand that correctly, this wouldn't just be that the bills pass the House and then a petition goes around with them. They'd have to start fresh with the petition, and then the House would vote on those, or the House would vote on those.
Right. Right. And then in the way it is right now, some of you have heard about adopt and amend, where the legislature actually adopted a petition and then sort of gutted it and changed it. In this case, if they agree with it, if the people in control of both houses of the legislature agree with it, they can just put it straight into law.
Okay. Were there any other thoughts on that? Santiago Romero or Senator Chang?
Thank you, Jamie, for sharing that. That's what terrifies me, is my only comment.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's like it's crazy that these things are citizen petitions when they could actually just completely bypass the citizens. So it's clearly something that we also need to fix in Michigan law. That should just not be an option. And also in Michigan, it's totally legal to lie when getting someone to sign your petition, which is a huge problem. And we know that there has been lots of problems with multiple previous petitions where people would just lie or say something give misinformation in order to get people to sign. And that's a whole other issue. But it's something that I think is really concerning, especially with this, because it is voting rights is a confusing thing for some people, and if framed in a way, I mean, it could cause people to sign without really realizing what they're signing. So if it does happen, it's going to be really important that we have a big decline to sign campaign, and that everyone's on board, and really making sure that people read what you're signing and understand it and ask questions.
Okay, that's good to know. Like, yeah, with this, it is remarkable to hear, to think about the number and think, and I don't remember exactly what Michigan's population is right now, but that's, it's
about 10 million. So it's about 3.4% of the state. And keep in mind what Senator Chang just said, a lot of the people who sign it will be misled about what they're signing on top of that. So very few people deciding to roll back voting access for the rest of us.
And would just like to add once again how incredibly close the last election was. So just think about how already split we are and the amount of work that we have to do in order to make sure that doesn't happen. So
that's another question that I will pivot to that at the moment. What are the ways that you would recommend kind of combating this kind of information, combating the misinformation about either petitions or just about the rumors and claims about the election in the past year? What do you recommend doing for that, like on a kind of citizen to citizen level, or like what's a path forward that you see and that you recommend? I'll start with you, Santiago.
Thanks. I actually was going to say Senator Chang, because I know that she has a good message, and I think that's like really where my thought went was, she's right. We need to be on the same message. We have to have the same message, the same materials, the resources, speaking the same, as my boss likes to say, singing from the same songbook, so that everyone understands what we're saying and believes in it, and then joins the choir for our work. So I think that's one way. I think I'm going to answer also, there was a question in the chat about what does this mean for social workers? I think it's that. I think it's understanding the power of what happens when when politicians who don't really care to set policies that support our people that we serve, that we work with, and what that actually, how that impacts our work. As social workers, we don't want bad policies that make our lives more difficult, that make it harder for us to work with our constituents. So for me, it is an important thing that social workers should take on. We have social workers across the state. I was mentioning NASW being a part of this. Absolutely, they should be calling. They should be also singing the same song, but to their constituents, to their neighbors, and really having them join in the choir. And the messaging, I think we will get. I like Senator Ching's messaging of these things came out of a lie, and we already have safe and secure voting in Michigan. So I think it's going to take all of us collectively knowing what that is, and then pushing that forward. And then yes, absolutely, as social workers, being a part of that fight.
I'll go with Senator Chang, since she just referred to you. You can add in anything you want with that.
Not too much to add. I just, again, these bills make it harder to vote and are based in a lie, and we need to really get that message out. And I think I'm a big believer in one-on-one conversations with people and in, organizing. And so groups like Voters Not Politicians and groups like We the People are doing really important work to mobilize. And I think that, this is like one of those times where, there's just people who just live and believe in this complete alternate reality of the truth. It's not the truth. So I think that we have to figure out a way to just really talk to one another. If there is like that family member of yours that just for whatever reason believes that the election was stolen, or if you have a neighbor who, is kind of like in the middle, but you can have a conversation with and in a rational way, those are all really important conversations. And I think that we're just in such a polarized, partisan environment right now, that those conversations are more important than ever. So I applaud the groups that are doing this on the ground, organizing and conversations.
Ms. Lyons, Eddie, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I know we're running short on time and people probably have questions, but I would just say multiply and amplify your voice by joining a group that's working on this. We talked to We the People, and we have NASW and Voters Not Politicians, and I think it really helps to get involved with a group that's pulling in the right direction on this.
Okay, yeah, we do have a few questions, so I'll pivot to those. We've kind of touched on related to these, so but I think they're still distinct enough. The first one is, what advice can you give grassroots organizers regarding voting rights advocacy and other political social justice efforts? Is there anything that you would add to what we've already said on that question? And just feel free for all of you to just jump in. Not much on that one. Okay, and that was one of the ones that I thought we had pretty much covered exactly, but just in case I was missing something. To Senator Chang, you were just talking about this a little bit, but the message that it makes it harder to vote and it's based on a lie. How do you recommend? And I'm tinkering with this question a little bit to make it different, but a lot of conservatives have admitted that there is no evidence of widespread voter fraud, and they still know that Republicans perform better when it's harder to vote. What kind of messaging do you do in those kinds of situations? Like where it's not just saying where the people that are in the alternate reality will say, or I guess that's kind of the ones that are they're in a third reality, we'll say. Or they're just willing to kind of undermine democracy in order to win elections. How do you recommend, or do you recommend engaging with those, or is that worth time or not?
Well, we should ask that question to Ed McBroom, because I know that I talked to him last week, and I know that he's tried to like actually, the people who have called his office, and he's tried to explain to them that the election wasn't stolen, and it doesn't sound like those conversations have really gone very well. But I think that so I don't really know the answer to your question. I think though that with any issue, there are people in the middle. There are people who are with you who need to be mobilized. And then there's some people who it may just, you thank them and thank you for sharing your opinion and sort of move on. So, and we have certainly gotten our fair share of emails to my own office from residents in my district who, on both sides, and obviously predominantly, in agreement with me, but definitely have heard from folks who, want to see all, just who believe all of the lies, and so we just thank them thank you for sharing your opinion. We appreciate you contacting our office, and we, please let us know if there's anything we can do for you, and just move on.
Okay. So one question that's for Gabriella and for Senator Chang. Can the two of you speak on the ethical obligation of social work to combat voter suppression? And they specifically say that, a lot of people may not see the profession as inherently political. And so how do you connect those two fields together?
Yeah, I can touch on this briefly. I think one of the things, so I'll touch on that question and then the question that we'll just put on the chat, because I think that they're both aligned. Social workers, we are trained to be empathetic, to be good listeners, to be good at conversations, to be able to hold people, and to be able to find a middle, to meet them where they're at. That is exactly what we need to do when we're doing deep canvassing conversations, when we're doing and deep canvassing conversations, to your question, Will, are things that we the people, I know Michigan United, I'm not sure if voters and not politicians do this as well, but these are, instead of it being someone knocking on your door asking you, are you registered to vote? You're not, you are, great, moving on. It's you knocking on the door and you talking about yourself, sharing your story, asking, can you take, a few minutes of your day to talk about an issue that we all care about? And this is exactly a perfect issue that we should be talking about in deep canvassing conversations. I think this is a conversation that social workers, we can all do some training on this. We the people does really good training on these conversations. I believe as social workers, we should actually put it, I actually have never seen this in my master's class of deep canvassing conversations in the organizing sense. And that is meeting people where they're at, talking about the political, talking about the stories, and then trying to find the middle. We the people, we had these conversations leading up to the election last year in 2020, and it was really hard, it was really rough, because these are organizers, primarily people of color, who are calling people who are conservative. We also had amazing white folks that were able to join too, white residents that called in that were part of this effort. And it was really important because we called some of the most conservative areas in the state of Michigan. And we had these deep conversations where we started asking people in Traverse City or in the UP, do you believe that there's oppression? Do you believe that a certain party doesn't care? And you would, rank it from 1 to 10. They'll be like, no, I absolutely don't. That's a 1, or 10, I absolutely do. Many people might start at a 1 or a 3, but you have a deep conversation. You meet where they're at. You say, I hear you. I hear what you're saying, but here's where I'm coming from in my experience. What do you think? At the end, it was amazing to see many of the votings went from 1 to 3 to 7 to 9, which is more on our side of, okay, you know what, you're right. Maybe we are all getting screwed by the policies that are happening across the state. Maybe my energy bill would be better if we all fought together, joined the city of Detroit, even though I'm the UP, in joining our voice to collectively fight for the same thing. So I would push that social workers, that organizers look into these conversations, because I think it's a really important, powerful thing to do. As Stephanie mentioned, that one-on-one is really powerful, but we can't just make 100 conversations by ourselves bring in your whole team, bring in your whole class and have these conversations because they really are powerful. I will end by saying that in the places of the state of Michigan that were incredibly red, the last election that we called, they turned blue. And that's ultimately, we believe, how we ended up going blue as a state. So these conversations are important, they matter, and they're incredibly powerful.
Senator Chang, anything to add to that? And then I think we'll go into final thoughts.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I would just say that, you know, social workers have a really important role to play here, just during this moment where we have so many issues of equity that Michigan is grappling with. And, you know, social workers come from a place where we are always thinking about how does this affect the most vulnerable? Is this equitable? Is it just? Does it do harm? And I think that those are questions that social workers are trained. You know, we come from that social justice framework, and it's our obligation to speak up and to make sure that we are standing for those who are most vulnerable.
Okay, well, thank you all for participating and for giving us your perspectives on this topic. So yeah, if there's any final thoughts, we have 2 minutes left, so I'll give any of you the opportunity, and you can just jump right in. If there's anything else you want to add that we didn't cover, or you just think needs more emphasis, or the floor is yours. Start with Ms. Lyons-Eddy if you have anything.
I would just encourage everybody to get involved, take a step, take an action. You know, posting on social media is great, but you know, if you can do more, if you can organize your own group of people, if you can join somebody else, I think there's a lot on the line right now. I think these bills and these policies, if they were enacted, could really change our state and ultimately result in representation that doesn't, you know, in a government that doesn't represent the voters. The time to act is now. So I would encourage you to do that.
Just thank you for putting this together. Thanks for everyone who's on. I think it's really important that we are just engaging in these conversations and talking to people, and really just remembering to always call these bills out for what they are, and also to be forward thinking. So once we defeat these bills, which we will, because we will, we have to, is that we also continue to look forward to what are the actual things that do need addressing, and what are ways that we could expand access and equity. And so hopefully we will be able to resume those conversations once we defeat these voter suppression bills.
Yeah, I would also just like to add things that come to mind for me is that, as was mentioned, this is not the end. These things will continue to happen. The quote that comes to mind is, freedom is a constant struggle. This is going to be a constant thing that happens. I would also just like to add, I really believe the other side is incredibly organized. They are very, very organized, and we need to be organized as well. And we need to start that today, because we need to grow the numbers. We need to change minds and hearts. That won't happen after one conversation, maybe not after two, maybe after 3 or 4. So this is going to be a long-term conversation, a long-term fight, and we do need to start that today. Start small, start with your family, start with that uncle, start with that cousin, but definitely do look into the organizations that you can join to get more training, to get more resources, to get more air under your wings to fly and continue to help us grow this work, because it's going to take all of us. And there's a real fear that there could be a petition that will try to pass these in the future, and actually that's what scares me the most, knowing that we are so torn. So definitely start to become organized and engaged now. It's going to be really important and really powerful for the long term. So thank you so much for having this panel. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you all so much for joining us. And yeah, it's been an honor to have you here. We've very much enjoyed this. And yeah, for anybody who wants to stay on and just ask other questions, some of us from the Voting Rights and Election Law Society will stay on. So thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.